Welcome to NewYorkBIO's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Lorraine Marchand, the General Manager of IBM Watson Life Sciences.
Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I am the CEO at NewYorkBIO. We're thrilled you're here to join us again for another virtual breakfast series. And thanks to Woodrow Sawyer for sponsoring this month's breakfast. It's interesting. Last week, I told you that you were going to hear about our annual meeting for the last time. Well, I may have lied. So thank you to those of you who participated in our annual meeting yesterday, including our guest today, Lorraine Marchand from IBM Watson Health. We had a wonderful gathering, both in person and virtual. And so we were really glad to bring together lots of thought leaders around the New York biotech community, patients, advocates, business people, funders, you name it. I think we actually pretty much covered the waterfront on who makes the New York biotech ecosystem sort of run. So we are especially pleased that we held on to Lorraine to be our guest this morning. She's pulling double duty for us by moderating a panel on data yesterday and then talking to us about her life experiences and some exciting upcoming work that she's got. As always, if you have questions for Lorraine during the course of our conversation, please put them in the chat or the Q&A boxes, and we will get to them as we can. With that, I'll turn it over to Derek to introduce Lorraine. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Jennifer. And while you may hear about the annual meeting, we are not going to ask you to register for it at this point. So we don't need to do that anymore. Lorraine, it is so terrific to have you here. And you have really kind of stepped into a pretty amazing role. You're the GM of life sciences for IBM Watson Health, but you've also you've touched on so many aspects of the industry throughout your career, and you kind of have had this just amazing journey to get where you are. Do you want to give us a little bit of background about kind of how you got where you are today and a couple of stops along the way?
Well, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Jennifer. It's really an honor to be with you this morning. And before we talk about me, I just want to compliment the two of you and congratulate you and your team on a phenomenal meeting yesterday. And having been at the NewYorkBIO annual meeting in the past, I've been involved in the New York biotech ecosystem for the last 10 or 15 years. It was just so rejuvenating to be in person, to be with colleagues, to talk about our industry again. You talked about the patient panels, the vision talks, just being able to get caught up on all of the industry trends and opportunities was really a terrific experience. And I just think that the meeting was very well done. And so I give a plug to you all as you start to plan for next year, get that, save the date out and make sure that you're there, because this meeting keeps getting better and better every year, honestly. And I've come to it serially. So I speak with some confidence about that. And I also thought that you handled the remote aspects of it very well. So really well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, Derek, maybe I'll just preface it with a story that I think captures my essence or purpose. And then I'll maybe pepper it with how a little bit of my professional.
Perfect.
I won't go on too much, I promise. But my dad was a serial inventor. And I use the word inventor because when he was an inventor, the word innovator really hadn't been coined. But because he was an inventor, he always challenged me and my brother to find 3 different solutions to every problem he would identify. And he was constantly finding different things that were problems that we needed to fix. And in order to illustrate this point, one summer, he took us to a local diner in Wheaton, Maryland, where I lived, called Hot Shops Cafeteria. And I was 13, my brother was 10. And our job was to sit in the big red vinyl booths while we had a bit of breakfast and observe what was slowing down table turnover. So for 3 days, we had our marble notebooks, remember the colored pens. I was the timer. My brother was diagramming, and we had the waitresses and the busboys, everybody involved. We interviewed them. I think about it now. We did customer research, market research, and we came back and finally made our presentation. And we said, you know what? The problem is empty sugar packets. At the time, people would rip up the sugar, put it in their coffee, their tea, they spew them on the table, they throw them on the floor, and picking up these pesky sugar packets was taking a lot of time. So then we had to embark on our solutioning. And my dad was never going to be satisfied with one solution. So we had to come up with at least 3 or 4. We had to kind of do some feasibility and prototyping. And so the solution that we ended up developing was called the Sugar Cube. And it was a plastic container. It had 4 panels of advertising that the restaurant could use. And then it had a section for the filled packets and a section for the discarded packets. And the Hot Shops cafeteria bought this product from us, and it was distributed throughout the Washington metropolitan area. And if I can say, I was sort of bitten by the innovation bug and how you take an idea to market. That's what happened. So if you kind of fast forward, I'd always had a natural interest in health. But when I was growing up, my grandmother had type 2 diabetes and she lived with us. And so I was responsible for a lot of her care, helping to inject insulin, helping to measure her meals. And I just started getting intrigued about what could we do in order to make the life of a person with diabetes easier? How could I start to solve some of these problems that she was grappling with? So that kind of spurred my interest in problem solving and healthcare. And then, something really seminal happened when I was at the National Institutes of Health. It was my second job out of college. And I was there in the National Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Disease Institute.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And at the time that I was there, we were working on a pivotal trial for diabetes, but I was in the Institute when, as I mentioned yesterday on the panel, clinical trials were only being conducted in middle-aged white men.
Yeah.
And because I was in the diabetes field and we're looking at the plethora of treatments, I'm looking at African Americans, Native Americans, women, all of the diversity, right, in the diabetes population. And I was also seeing the sequencing of the human genome. We've had the first gene therapy, ended up tragically with Jesse Gelsinger, but all the new cell therapies and for sickle cell, et cetera. And I sat there thinking to myself, because the problem orientation and the curiosity, yeah. We do not have an industrialized clinical trial machine in order to be able to respond to all of the science that's going to be coming our way, right? So how are we going to get into rare diseases and cell and gene therapy if we've got this mom and pop orientation around clinical trials and we only have the capability of being able to conduct them in one segment of the population? So I decided that was the problem I was going to solve. And the rest of my career trajectory was about sitting in different stakeholder seats, solving that exact problem. So when I went to Porter Novelli and I created Patients First, which was how we sort of productized patient recruitment. When I went to Bristol Myers Squibb and created Study Strategy and Planning, which was a global entity looking at how we could accelerate drug development. When I went to Covance, IQVIA, Cognizant Technology Solutions, really every place that I've gone has been about, let me grab some part of this problem and work on it from the seat of a stakeholder. So it sort of brought me full circle to IBM Watson Health, because as we talked about yesterday, data and analytics and being able to drive insights from real world is just at the centerpiece of being able to get therapies to patients faster. Yep. So whether it's spurring discovery, development, commercial use cases of who's responding, who's not responding, helping to accelerate rare diseases, it sort of all comes down to the fact that we can now harness this data, but importantly, apply analytics on top of it, AI on top of it, and drive these insights. And so there's no better place to me to be innovating at this point in my career than around really being able to create a data ecosystem and an infrastructure, again, that's scaled, that's fit for purpose, just like the same problem I was tackling with the clinical trial infrastructure. Like, this is where we've all going to be focused right now, because this is going to be the future that really moves us up that trajectory.
Yeah. Can we just talk about how broad the data field is for a second? I mean, if you think about this, we have, between cloud applications, there's EMR stuff, there's AI, there's machine learning, there's genome sequencing. You think about how broad, data is writ large, the sources of data we have. So very often you have to kind of figure out what people are talking about when they talk about data. You really have to go a couple layers deeper to actually think about either the problem that they're trying to solve or even just the substrate that they're working in, right? So for where you sit now, because IBM touches all of these things, right? I imagine where you sit now, that's both, it has to be both a strategic advantage and an incredibly difficult challenge, right? So is there a bit of a focus challenge there? How do you think about that?
Well, that's a great question. And it is definitely one of the challenges that we all face. And we touched on it in yesterday's panel as well. We think about the creation of what I'll just loosely term an intelligent patient record, an intelligent health record at the patient level. I think that's what we all aspire to be able to create. So that digital equivalent of the patient using real world data. And that intelligent health record, the biggest challenge in data is quality and missingness, quality and completeness.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have, the most complete record, because obviously we're dealing with statistical significance and there are ways to compensate for some of that. But you want the record to be as complete as possible. And you definitely want it to be high quality. So I think about, let me just use a simple analogy of the data layer cake. Okay.
The data layer cake. Oh, I like this.
Forget about the data lake, because I think about it this way. I think about the data layer cake as, the first layer being claims, pretty easy to access data. We think about our market scan product and other claims databases that have been out there for 25, 30 years. So that's kind of your basic layer. Then on top of that, increasingly, we have access to clinical data. So that's coming through our EMR system. And as we know, that's structured, but the real value is in the unstructured notes. So we all agree, right? The value of the clinical data is unstructured. And then you layer on top of that lab data, really important, because now you need to correlate that with imaging data, also really important, particularly in oncology disorders, neurodegenerative disorders, we talk about that. The holy grail, of course, and a nascent area that we really need to be focused and improving on is the omics data, because right now, a lot of the genetic testing, the genetic screening is either in really healthy consumers, right? So we think about the 23andMe, which had 5,000 healthy 25-year-olds in San Francisco in their data set in the earliest days. Not really very interesting for pharma. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got, stage 4 advanced breast cancer patients, right, that have gone and had a test with Invitae or one of the other, data providers. And so you've got this real divide. And what we need to do is we need to do a better job. I hate to use the tired word of democratize, but we really do need a better job of getting good quality omics data, more people having the access to omics data, because right now there are barriers in terms of the payment for it, that sort of thing. And then the layer on top of that, and these two last layers are, when I talk to pharma in particular, these are the two real high value pieces, the omics. And then on top of that is the direct to patient, right? So the data that's coming in from wearables, patient reported outcomes, everything that's coming in from the patient. So the reason I use the layer cake is because you could take $1 and you could distribute the dollar among the layers. And most of that dollar, probably 80 cents of that dollar, or 75 cents of that dollar is going to be distributed among that omics and that wearable data. If you're a pharma company, saying where you spend your money. And I think that's important to understand, because it speaks to both the cost of that data in terms of how much we need to be willing to spend on it, but it also speaks to the value of it, right? And so the highest value are on those two top layers of the data layer cake, but in order to create this intelligent record, you need all the layers, right? And you need all the layers to correlate, yes, and they need to work together. So you can't really do that much with any one of the layers individually. I mean, you can run certain use cases, but the value is having all those data layers in the layer cake. And the real value kicker these days is around the omics and the wearables. And so I think when we think about data, we think about how can we make more sense of the unstructured notes? And to your question, Derek, that's where the natural language processing comes in, and really important capabilities around AI. It's being able to take those unstructured notes and derive some insights from them. So we need the analytics on the unstructured information. We need to be able to correlate the labs and the imaging with the omics, really important. And then we need to have technology that allows us to understand and interpret what we're getting from the wearables, what we're getting from the PRO. And so the natural language processing, machine learning, and other AI tools enable us to draw insights from that and really kind of leverage that whole cake as we think about that intelligent health record and creating, you know, for example, a cohort of patients that you could use in a natural history study in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Like that could be created in the real world. You could use natural history to understand the endpoints. And, you know, that's the power of a cohort that you'd be able to develop. And that has a premium value in drug discovery and development, particularly to pharma companies. So that's really high value.
So but how do you get a company to think about, if they have $1 and they only want to spend 80% of it on those top two pieces, how do you get them to understand that they have to invest in what goes before that as well?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, the pharma companies definitely understand the importance and the value of the full layer cake, because that completeness of the record is important to them. I think that when it comes to the value equation, if they have money to spend on a program, they would be more willing to spend more money on that omics data and on enabling the wearables than they might be spending on. So it's a little bit more about the proportionality, but they still understand that they need all of the data in order to make sense of all of this.
The results that they're looking for.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, we've made a huge mistake this morning in talking about layer cake on being hungry, right? So now, literally, also artistically, you know, I think there's a win here somewhere if someone in the audience is an artist and it can actually do the data layer cake thing. I think there's an award-winning New Yorker cartoon here. But you said something before that really kind of harkened back to yesterday's panel. So Angela Radcliffe from BMS, I think, said this, and you're talking about high quality data. And one of the big points that Angela made was that in a lot of ways, we don't have a patient set that is incentivized to work to give us the best data, whether it's wearables, whether it's, you know, compliance is not really a great word to use from a patient perspective, but the patients are in a lot of ways not necessarily incentivized to try to make, you know, the data that they give us less, you know, more structured, higher quality, et cetera. And it's a real challenge, because how do we incentivize patients to do something better for us? We do rely on them. How do we incentivize them to do that if, you know, at the end of the day, they kind of don't own that data and they don't really participate in any of the benefit that comes from that data? It's almost like we want that data to be better and we want to use it, and please trust us, we're trying to help you in the future. There's no real wrong answers, but it's actually just a very difficult challenge, because ultimately, you know, the phrase is garbage in, garbage out, right? If your data that you start with is no good, you're never going to get to the point at the end where what you do is actually going to have impact.
So I'll answer that in two ways. You know, one is definitely, there's no doubt that we need more transparency, awareness, building the consumer's understanding of the value of data and what they can receive back by participating in efforts. And I think probably some of the best examples are with registries. The Muscular Dystrophy Association, for example, has a registry. People are incented to provide their information. Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation has also put together an initiative in order to encourage people to provide their data and then get aggregated reports back that help them understand people like them, reactions to drugs. So it's really important to give back. I think Picnic Health is a great example of being able to take individuals' medical records, and they provide a place where they're hosted and stored, and patients can have access to them. But then they can also, again, get these aggregated reports on these are other patients with sickle cell disease. These are the therapies that they're responding to. And I think in the breast cancer community, they probably have done it the best, where obviously a highly motivated organization, and they have put together literally platforms that not only are you providing your data, you're interacting with other patients, you're having conversations with healthcare professionals, and you get to participate in this whole platform as a consumer, providing information, getting information back, really interactive and just multimodal, multidisciplinary. And that is probably one of the best examples that I've seen. So I guess the question is, how do you take some of these great examples? Because I think there are registries, I think there's consortia, I think there's a Picnic Health, I think there's breast cancer communities, great case studies. And we've got to figure out, again, how do we get these to industrial scale? So if I toggle over to a technical response, I think one of the ways we do that is through the blockchain. Because if we make blockchain available to patients, then they can be providing their data on that blockchain. They own it. They have the lock and key. They can monetize it, right? That was George Church's big idea. Well, people need to own their data. They need to monetize their data. So if my data is on a blockchain, I can add records to it. I can have access to it, and I can do with it what I want. If I want to monetize it, I can monetize it. If I want to provide it to you for real world information for a clinical trial in an altruistic fashion, I can do that. And we're starting to move toward that idea of the blockchain. And an example is, as so many companies have come up with these digital health passes for vaccines, what IBM has done is IBM has a digital health pass. It is built on the blockchain. And so when a patient downloads the IBM verifier and scans their card, they now have their own electronic blockchain record. And so they can add other information to it. They can fill out surveys. And so that's the beginning of this intelligent health record, which is not being used selfishly, but it's something that's owned, built, and maintained by the patient. They have ownership and access to it, and they can use it as they wish. So I think it sort of completes that intelligent health record story to take it back to the patient. Absolutely believe that they own that data. They should have the rights to it. And if we put it on the blockchain, then there's an opportunity that they will. And obviously, when we get to that question of quality, now we have better quality, right? Because that's immutable. We know the timestamp on it. We know when it was entered. Nobody can, go in and modify it at all.
Right.
So Lorraine, can we go back to your example about the creating the vaccine pass? IBM worked on the Excelsior pass, right? Which is what we use in New York.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Right. So that is a good example. But right now, the only thing, and I just pulled mine open while you were talking, just to look, I was like, because I don't think I can add anything. The only thing that's available on that you can't do anything other than display your pass. Do you think as we go forward with COVID, we've got vaccines and now potential boosters, depending on, your status. Do you think that that's something that would be helpful to create across different jurisdictions, so that, for example, like right now, I can show my New York pass, but that only is really helpful in New York. Otherwise, I have to carry my little, CDC card.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Jennifer. So we need to, again, use that technology, use the blockchain, give the patients access to it, consent them in such a way that they can add additional information to it. And then that can be a national pass, a global pass, right? Yeah. That allows you to, and that really would get to the standardization and, interoperability and creating that infrastructure and that ecosystem that would be industrial strength. That's where we need to go with that. And that is the backbone of it. You're exactly right.
Can you
we have a really good,
wait, one second, because I'm just going to follow with this. Can you add non-health, right? So I'm thinking, okay, if I'm traveling, now I might need a vaccine pass. If I'm outside the US, I also need my passport. Can you add non-health records? Is it multiple types of data, or does that confuse what it might be used for on the back end as far as health data?
So I think that's a great question. And the idea is to design it so that it can accommodate data in various types of formats, so that it is multi-use, multi-purpose. So the vision is definitely to create this in such a way that it has multiple uses for you, and there's different, and once you put, unstructured data in there, then obviously there's a lot that's similar in terms of format of different kinds of unstructured data. So yes, that's the vision of what we want to create.
So we had a couple of questions on this that I think will help from a clarifying perspective too. So the first one is, who pays for these health records, right? And then, again, the other tack onto it was, what about data from other sectors of healthcare, like surgery? I mean, it gets to the point where you have to be able to. I've always thought probably the best case, or the best use case for the blockchain in healthcare, right? It makes so much sense. But between, adoption, payment, and the ability to kind of put more stuff into it, how does all of that stuff happen? So first of all, who pays for it? And how do you actually get the capabilities of adding to it with other pieces of and other sectors of healthcare?
Yeah, so I mean, at this point in time, I would say that the idea is a little bit, give to get. And so an employer could say, here's the digital health pass, it's on the blockchain. We'd like to offer it to you in order to upload your vaccine information. And then to Jennifer's point, we're going to create the capability in order for you to put other healthcare records also in this, in this blockchain for your access, for our access to share with your doctor. So that's one way that it can be developed. And so you're having access to it, and the customer obviously hasn't paid anything in order to have their information in this type of format. And the employer or the health insurer is encouraging them to do that. I do think that we can get to a situation down the road where if we want to go direct to patient, there probably will be a fee that we would want to pay to that patient in order to put this information on the record. So I could definitely see that as we move forward. And I think that would be a positive thing to go direct to patient, to figure out, what the value is, to pay them for that information, but then to make sure that they're the ones that get to also use that information. Because I think in this, this idea of give to get, you give the data, but you also get something back, and that you have the record, you get aggregated reports and information. That's actually turned out to be a very nice model in the world of data that people are willing to give if they're going to get something back that's of value to them. So I think you have to keep working on that equation in order to make it worthwhile. And what does the patient need back? And so I think continuing to have that dialogue and do that research and understand what patients need back. So I think there are ways that you can set that up. And then as far as how we create, greater interoperability and add other records to it and start working across state lines, et cetera. We talked a lot about this yesterday, right? The state-based models and the silos. So we definitely need to create a set of standards. We need to create the linking technology. And so all of that needs to happen technologically in order to bring the data together. But the technology behind bringing the data together is actually not that difficult, right? We have tokens and we have ways that we can do this and places that we can store it. We have to protect the PHI. So there's challenges there, but we figured out how to de-identify. The challenges are more at the people level, right? And when I say the people level, they're more, I used the word governance yesterday, and Allison said, well, I prefer the word stewardship. So that's fine. It's the stewardship of the data. It's the data sharing agreements. It's, allowing it to leave, well, maybe not even leave my environment, because in a federated system, it doesn't even have to leave the environment. But what we have found is that the toughest aspects of this are all around the governance, the data use, the contracts, the consent. And that's one of the reasons why Angela was focusing on this idea of sort of this really early managed consent process. So we need to create these enablers, in the infrastructure and in the ecosystem at a technical level, at a governance level, at a patient comfort level with their PHI and the consent. I'm not going to use the word a cake metaphor again, but this whole system, right? This whole system has to be built.
Croissant.
If we have the cake, is there like a cup of coffee metaphor? Like we have we have our data cake and we have our personal health information cup of coffee, and
yeah, so all of this, so all that still has to be built out. And yeah, to your point, those are the real challenges. And I really appreciated yesterday's discussion, and even the New York mayor's pushing on this idea of how do we really encourage data sharing, because that's really the obstacle that is holding us all up. And so I think we all need to be committed to come together and figure out some of that and get a lot more comfortable. And there are ways to do it. There are definitely ways to do it. We work on it every single day. We're removing obstacles, folklore, misunderstandings, myths, proprietariness. It's,
Is there a particular community that you think goes first, right? Because having this trickle down to, where it's used by everyone is obviously massive, right? I mean, you can imagine the challenges of getting this to be ubiquitous, but is there kind of a subsegment that really really leads the way and all gets on board and says, this is something that we believe is really important to our community and to our stakeholders? I mean, you mentioned muscular dystrophy before. You can imagine that a group like that, where there's actually a real interest not only in helping the patients that are here today, but really trying to provide a solution or a cure, something better for the patients that are going to come in the future, right? Any parent is not going to want to have another parent going to have to deal with this, right, if they can help it. So are there communities like that you think are, have the chance to maybe go first, and to actually work out some of these things because perhaps their interests are a little bit more aligned?
Yes, and I think that some of those communities were at the conference yesterday. So I think when you're talking about the parent of a child with a very rare neurodegenerative disease, I think when you're talking about a rare condition like sickle cell, it's absolutely going to be the patient communities that come forward, the patients, the caregivers, the providers, all of those interested stakeholders who say, I'm not going to be satisfied with the status quo. I mean, look at the movement behind patients like me, right? The clinical trial with an N of 1. Who would have thought that would have ever been possible to be in Australia and to be receiving, a drug for another condition for your cancer in Australia and to be in a clinical trial with an N of 1. But the patient community got behind that and really made it happen. So they're massive mobilizers. As you know, we have some of the best examples, again, in oncology, whether it's with breast cancer or pancreatic, and also I think increasingly in the neurodegenerative community. So I talked about the Muscular Dystrophy Association, the Spinal Muscular Atrophy Association. They were really in the movement and help, Novartis and Biogen bring those products to market. So I think that's probably where it's going to have to start, is at a grassroots with those patient communities and people that really have need. I really appreciated Angela's personal story about her brother dying from a genetic defect that ended up being in the family, and being in a clinical trial where they were tracking that genetic defect, and 100 people in her family, right, were saved the same experience, death being the final step there, because of that clinical trial. So I think that those are really powerful, moving examples of what can happen if we've got the data, we've got the patient community, we've got the ability to do the analytics and drive the insights from it, and we want to make change, and we put our fears to the side. I mean, we've got to, we talk a little bit about innovation, but in innovation, you have to be able to adopt or adapt to some level of risk. It's never going to be completely perfect.
We had a good question that says along these, why can't we start with government or state subsidized community healthcare programs? E.g., it says Husky in Connecticut for children, Medicaid, Medicare. It says, or is there a backlash on the government state level?
I think that's a really good question. And I'm sure that there are, folks that are much more qualified to answer that particular question than I am, because I've had some government background. I worked at the National Institutes of Health, and I've done some work at the state level, but my experiences, primarily life sciences. But I think that the person asking the question is touching on an interesting point. And that is, is there a backlash from the government, right? Wanting to collect this data just because there can be skepticism, right, of government. On the other hand, I think if it's done properly with full transparency, I mean, the All of Us program that's being sponsored by the NIH
Right.
has been very successful, right? A lot of people are participating in that. So I think it can be done. I think it's a great idea. The thing I like about it is that it's a closed system. You've got the healthcare records, you know who the patients are. So if you can build that trust, and if you can figure out the give to get, so that's really going to be important. Like, you can't just take, you've got to give back. So if you can figure that part out and you can get the trust built, we spent a lot of time talking about trust yesterday, then I think that those can potentially be great places to start.
Well, you can't just go to a payer, in this case, the state for Medicaid, right? State and federal, and say, okay, so we want you to feed all of the data in because you're paying for this healthcare, right? And because you have to have the patients want their data to be used. And I think one or two overreaches can set everything back. I mean, I think that's a risk, right?
Yes. And I think, again, it brings us back to this topic of figuring out the consent systems and how you manage consent. So that's got to be, like, that's a critical piece of the infrastructure or the ecosystem that we've got to crack the code on, right? Yeah. How do you just create that consent? How do you manage that consent? Again, maybe blockchain technology could be helpful for that. I give my consent. This is what I'm giving it for. Something else comes in that I want to consent. I can add that. I mean, we do that with Apple every day on our devices, right? We give consent to share information or download apps or whatever it might be. So,
and we don't even read it. Right?
We don't even read it.
Exactly. Yeah, no. Of course I consent. Of course I consent. Just let me do the thing. I'm hitting the button.
You want to download, right?
So you say, well, if you can do that in order to download an app and, have your information, why can't we figure it out for healthcare? So again, the technology is not the issue here. It's all the human issues and building that trust and the governance and setting up the standards and the rules of the road that we need to tackle.
Yes. Well, I would also say that kind of healthcare and health records are probably more consequential than Candy Crush, right? So your sharing around whatever you're putting on your phone there is probably a little less consequential than all of the other things that have the gravity that we tend to talk about here.
Yeah.
So changing gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you've done at Columbia. So you've been at Columbia now for the last however many years, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about your role there and what kind of perspective that gives you really on both the greater healthcare system now that we operate in, and really kind of does it give you a perspective on the future too, because you see all these young people that are really kind of the next generation of people that are going to populate our industry.
So the course that I've taught for a number of years now is innovation in global healthcare. And, it was really clear at the graduate school level that students were certainly trying to understand the US healthcare system and all of its complexity. And, those are full semester courses in and of themselves. But they also just had an interest in understanding what are the healthcare models that can be extrapolated to other markets. So the genesis of that course was helping to do a review, not only of the US system, the UK, the German, some of the social systems that we have in Europe, but what can we learn from frugal innovation in healthcare in India? What can we learn about healthcare system development in Haiti with a private system that's taking care of hundreds of thousands of patients, completely privatized? Or what can we learn from the first private healthcare system that was set up in China or Bangladesh? And so the purpose of the course has really been to examine the healthcare model, right? This idea of quality, access, and cost, and sort of how do you get those three pieces to come together in such a way that we can have high quality, affordable care that's available to all, right? I mean, that is just no matter what system you look at, every healthcare system is grappling with the same problem. You know, I don't care if it's Bangladesh, middle income, or if it's Haiti, you know, at the bottom of the pyramid, or if it's the US, everybody's trying to figure out how to make affordable healthcare accessible to as many people as possible. So that's really what the course is examined. And so it's really gratifying to see that students have an altruistic interest in that, right? How they can contribute and how that can be made better. So, and then on the healthcare advisory board that I serve on for the healthcare and pharmaceutical management program at Columbia, you know, on that board, I have an opportunity to interact with other industry leaders, to interact directly with the students, some of their programming, with the faculty and the curriculum that's being developed. So, you know, really to have an opportunity to contribute and review and participate in the healthcare program that is developed and managed at Columbia. So I think it's really, you know, brought me into, again, you know, the New York ecosystem and, you know, focusing on its ability to have such an influence and an impact on healthcare across the globe. I mean, New York is a phenomenal place for all the reasons that we know. And it really is very encouraging and welcoming to entrepreneurship and innovation and advances in healthcare, you know, through crown jewels like the New York Genome Center and, you know, the partnerships program and J Labs and NewYorkBIO. So there's just so much that we have available in New York. And I think that the students at Columbia really want to be able to tap on all of that. And they want to figure out how they can really start to solve some of these intractable problems, not just in the US, but they want to have a global impact. So this work has given them an opportunity to think and develop that.
And I think we've seen the academic institutions probably all over at least the US, but certainly we know about our institutions here, really encouraging and focusing on sort of developing that entrepreneurial muscle, right, in students who are interested in that. With a more singular focus on giving them the resources they need to try to become entrepreneurs and do it that way.
Yeah, it's very popular among students right now. I think that their interest in innovation and entrepreneurship is at an all-time high at Columbia through the Lang program and the labs and the innovation grants. I'm also teaching a course on venture creation at Yeshiva University, which at a graduate level, you know, realized that they wanted to do a lab-based program in order to train biotech-based students on how to do innovation and entrepreneurship, whether in a corporate environment or a startup environment. So it's just really strong passion, very, very powerful interest among students today, which I think is great because you can really change the world if you're willing to get into, you know, innovative mindset and
Absolutely. And, you know, I think it's an underappreciated asset in New York between the entire student population and certainly the population of PhD students and postdocs that are here. So I think one of the things that we're going to find, especially in New York City, is the more building blocks that get put on top of that, people are going to realize that we have this incredible substrate of talent that's here and is able to be fed into that. So with you mentioned the innovative mindset or the innovation mindset. Let's talk about your book, because over the last, you know, when COVID hit, you turned around and wrote a book, and now you have this great piece coming out on basically on innovation, you know, rules for innovation, steps for innovation, et cetera. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, like so many of us, I think during COVID, we were deliberate about saying, looks like I'm going to be staying home for a while. What do I want to do with my time? Maybe I want to learn a new language. Maybe I'm going to write a piece of music. And I decided that over my 10 to 15 years of being an innovator, whether it was innovating in large corporations and creating entrepreneurial endeavors, or whether it was doing my own startups, which I, you know, have had a serial startup part of my career as well, whether it was coaching and mentoring principal investigators at the University City Sciences Center or the NYU Endless Frontier Lab or Columbia's Translational Medicine program. and also working with students at the graduate level, that I had a lot of content. I've taught, innovation and entrepreneurship at Princeton. I've taught at Columbia, the Yeshiva program, and all of these different incubators. So I decided I was going to pull all that content together, and would I be able to kind of codify it in a way that would be helpful to first-time innovators or individuals that still thought that there was something that they could learn about the process. And so, really use that time to lay out the 8 laws. And the 8 laws really follow the steps. If innovating for commercialization purposes is your goal, whether you're a for-profit or a social enterprise or a not-for-profit, the steps are really the same. And so I've codified those steps. And so the book follows each of those steps. It gives you a sort of a tried and true process, step-by-step process that you can go through in order to build out and test your own idea, your business plan, understand the marketplace, develop your investor pitch, all the way to launching your product. And I wanted to make sure that it was really readable and fun and interesting and full of case studies, because when I developed the course for Princeton, it was honestly based on all the mistakes that I had made as a startup person. and so I sort of crafted this word that you never fail, you just keep pivoting. You can't pivot infinitum, but you can pivoting, right? And so if you think I'm not going to fail, I'm just going to pivot, I'm going to move in this direction. And I love the comment that Esther Dyson made yesterday. We sat next to each other at dinner, and she has a refrigerator magnet that I didn't realize she had put a copyright on, and she still gets royalties from it. And her refrigerator magnet says, today, I think it says something like, today, make a new mistake. Today I'm going to make a new mistake. I love that. Like, that's what innovation is about, right? Sometimes it's about making those mistakes and not seeing them as such. So, I put that together. So a lot of the stories are about some of the early mistakes that I made, but each one opens with a personal vignette, whether from my own professional background, some from my childhood, like my sugar packet story. And then I really had the pleasure of interviewing some phenomenal innovators just across industries. So Spencer Raskoff from Zillow and Phil McKemie from Hewlett-Packard, but all the way to Dan Navarro, who was a musician who took his show on the road in a van in order to take music out to people during COVID, and other innovators. So it's just, woven with case studies and great examples, but it does have a process that innovators can follow. So
there's a lot of power in the don't do that story. Right. In the lesson where it's like, I tried to do that. That was really hard. Here's why it didn't work. And it's like, well, it sounded like a good idea. And you're like, I thought it was a good idea too. Turns out it was wrong, and it was really hard. And a lot of times people are pretty willing to look back at that and say, I really thought that was going to work too. And here is all the hard stuff that I found when I tried it. Right. So, Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz wrote a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Right, which was basically all of these things that were incredibly difficult that nobody really thinks about, in his case, when he started his company or when they started their venture firm. But there's a lot of power in basically having people learn from either mistakes that you've made or bumps that you've gotten over in the road. So, I think that's really interesting, and it's going to be a great read. So it comes out in the spring.
Yes. So it'll be published in the spring. And, as a woman innovator, I also looked at the literature, and I didn't see a ton of books on innovation, especially, kind of the step-by-step process and commercial focus written by women. So I do have a special chapter on women in innovation. And in that chapter, I've got my own Women Innovators Hall of Fame. And so I did my own research on women that I thought, based on their patents or their resilience or their ideas, had some phenomenal innovations. So you'll find the likes of Hedy Lamarr in the book, and the woman who invented the first dishwasher. But then, of course, you find women like Marie Curie. So I have a full catalog of women innovators. And then I've also developed a women's resource guide because there are a lot of programs available for women now, VC funds and angel funds and accelerator programs. And I want more women to go into innovation because, the ranks among STEM have always been somewhat challenging. And so I think if we can encourage more women to take risks and to think more like that innovation mindset, it's all about curiosity and problem solving. But then there's some hardcore risks that you have to take to be an innovator as well. Yeah. And so I think if you can get a leg up with some resources that can help you, again, accelerate, avoid the mistakes. When I did my first startup, it took me a year to get around and talk to all the people that I need to talk to, probably 100 different individuals that I had to speak with in order to develop a business plan. That was I learned a lot and it was great fun to get out there, but you shouldn't have to take you a year and talking to 100 people. You know what I mean? So yeah. I want to shortchange all that for everybody. I like to try to use my experience to accelerate for other people.
Yeah. And I thought it was great. And I was just going to say, I thought it was great for those who are interested, since your book isn't out yet and they can't, there's a series of Medium interviews, which are short little snippets on the different principles or the rules.
Yes.
And so people can find those online, which I thought were great.
Yeah, I posted them on my website. I've got them on LinkedIn, and yeah, they're just peppering real quick little vignettes about some of the laws, but there'll be more to come this spring.
That's great. We have a related question that says, what are some examples of resources to help elevate those of us interested in innovation?
So I think that there are venture capital sources that some of which are, I would say, more conducive to first-time innovators or those with an entrepreneurial spirit than others. So I don't know if the questioner, is a woman or a man, but there's the Columbia Angels group. There's 37 Angels, which is there for women. So I think a lot of VC resources. And then there are accelerator programs. And, in a lot of these accelerator programs, again, I've got a list, and if they want to text me, I'd be happy to share some of the list.
She has followed up and says she is a woman of color.
Okay, great. And I actually have some resources for women of color, because if you can get in some of these programs, a lot of them are sponsored by VCs that are also doing educational programs. You can be assigned a mentor. You can have an investor that's interested in working with you. You can get the education, the training, coaching, just to work with you side by side along this journey. And even if you're based in New York, it's not particularly for women of color, but the New York Endless Frontier Labs, I think they got several hundred applications this year. So they always take in a cohort of early stage companies, product ideas, a lot of women in the ranks. I'm a mentor there, highly encourage one to look at that. And I know they really have an interest in bringing more women into the ranks and providing support for them. So would be happy to follow up though and provide some other resources to you. Can't think of everything in the resource guide off the top of my head here. I'm probably distracted with the metaphor about cake. I'm probably thinking too much about it.
You should have used a more savory example.
I know. But I'll get it to you, I promise.
Well, what we do is we start with the clinical data and we mix all of that in, and then
I know I'm Southern, so a casserole would make sense, but I'm not quite sure that would apply to a broader audience.
Yeah, no, I don't know how we make an innovation casserole, and I don't know if but the layer cake is nice because you can at least now separate the different things out. It's a good analogy, and I had somehow put it out of my mind, but now I'm thinking about it again, so we brought that up. Yeah, so that's good. So we have a few minutes left, and I think we can kind of bring it back full circle to, this stuff we were talking about at the beginning, to really our data layer cake, right? So if we think about the future, if we think about, the types of, I think about the kind of data environment that my kids are going to progress into, right? What are some of the things that you think are the building blocks that we need to get to in order to realize that, right? What's the intermediate step that actually allows us to start to get this kind of foothold where that kind of blockchain-based, personal health records. What are the things that have to happen for that to be close to reality or be possible?
Yeah, so I think the prescription is twofold. I think the first part is some of what we've touched on already, which is we've got to figure out data use rights, data sharing, stewardship, consent among the patient. So we've got to get all of the components around how we manage and protect the data, because we should be viewing data as a crown jewel. And patients should feel that their data is a crown jewel. And so it needs the stewardship in order to make sure that it's maintained and has, high quality, but it's treated in the utmost manner. Because as Jennifer mentioned early on, you just need one breach, right? Facebook hacking, Google hacking, where people say, whoa, I don't want to be part of this anymore. And that's everybody's greatest fear. So we've definitely got to put all the stewardship and the protection in so that people feel comfortable providing and sharing their data. I think the second part is the give to get. So if I give my data, what do I get back? And we've got to get that I'm going to use the word transaction, but I don't really mean it in the true sense of the word. Yeah. But we've got to get that give to get, or that transaction, or, I get this value in order to provide you this value. Like, what does the commerce look like? What do the economics look like? That's got to be developed. And I think third is around the technology. And I think something like the blockchain is a technology that, if you kind of follow this through, it kind of comes full circle, because now the blockchain can make me feel more secure about the data, that it's my PHI, that I have control over it, that I know where it is at any particular time, so that the stewardship is sort of taken care of. Maybe the give to get is taken care of as well, because now it's my data. I can use it as I so wish. And so that technical piece, I always believe that form follows substance, right? So the form, the technical fit, or the technical fix, or whatever we design technically to do the linking, the hosting, the storing, et cetera, the enrichment, creating that cohort technically, it's got to flow out of the right kind of stewardship and the right kind of give to get model. So I guess if I had to break it into those three pieces need to be created probably on parallel paths, because they have to work together. But those are the three things that I think we need to have happen in order to make this work. And I am hoping that there are a lot of young, bright people that want to, team up with us, that have been long in the tooth in healthcare, in order to figure this out, because it's going to take a collaboration of people that have spent their careers in healthcare and have a lot of respect for the patient, for the regulatory aspects of our industry, but can understand from a consumer perspective, how you might be able to put some of this together. I think we've all seen times when there's been such a focus on the technology, and maybe the entity didn't have the healthcare esprit de corps or acumen or sensibilities, and things haven't gone very well. So you really do need the two to meet in the middle, because healthcare is special. We always say that, but it really is special, very unique. And
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, you can't have it be totally siloed and transactional, to use your term, without taking into account what the data is in this case, right? That you're trying. It's not number of widgets or how fast your production line is pushing them out. It's people's actual physical health, mental data, and that's really important for people. So
yes, absolutely.
I think you've nailed it, and your give to get concept is perfect, because it really has the patient and the user at the center of it. You think about value, you think about trust, you think about all of those things, and it wraps that concept right into it in the right way. So Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been absolutely wonderful. You're just an amazing component of this ecosystem, and can't thank you enough, both for yesterday, for this morning, and for all of the great work that you're doing at IBM. So thank you so much, everybody out there. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.